All right, we have Zach Kobrin, who's counsel at Akerman, previously the general counsel and chief compliance officer for a large multinational cannabis company. Zach's practice focuses on cannabis and hemp law. In his prior capacity, Zach was responsible for corporate and regulatory legal matters. Zach was also a key member of the team that helped take his former company public on the CSE. His practice involves advising clients on complex legal and business issues impacting cannabis with interest in this heavily regulated industry. He speaks frequently at all forums and speaks on legal and regulatory and compliance issues, and also advises clients on developing federal and state public policy matters. Keegan Peterson is the founder and CEO of one of the top non-plant touching companies in the cannabis industry. Prior to founding Wurk, W-R-K, Keegan spent 8 years working for high-growth HR tech companies, developing a deep understanding of various solutions within the space. Keegan founded Wurk after recognizing that cannabis businesses were repeatedly being dropped by workforce management vendors. Wurk is the first workforce management company designed specifically for the cannabis industry, and it brings together technology solutions and an ecosystem of experts to ease human resources, payroll, and compliance frustrations that cannabis companies face every day. Through his background in human resources technology and his hands-on experience helping cannabis companies with their compliance needs and issues, Keegan has developed a unique understanding of how to solve these challenges. Thank you all very much, and I guess I'm going to hop in as your moderator because that seat's empty. So you are stuck with me.
We've got, can everyone hear us? We've got
15 people.
Yes.
We've got 15 people.
And each life matters, right?
You know, that's 14 more people than the last count we had.
Perfect. We do have questions here that we put together with our moderator who's not here. So we.
He's here somewhere.
Is our moderator here?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing I'm going to do is have my head of marketing add about 2 or 3 more paragraphs to my intro.
I think you should.
Make it about 10 minutes long.
That's right.
All right. Okay, so the panel is about compliance and a lot of regulations that are going in place and a lot of things that these cannabis companies, people in the industry may not be focused on, and how to provide a little bit of guidance on staying on top of some of these issues. So I can go through some of these, how we kind of structured this for today. So the first thing we're going to dive into is the tax landscape for ancillary goods services providers. Is this anything? So I guess our backgrounds, my background's HR, payroll, technology, making sure people get paid, making sure taxes get paid, making sure that these businesses are structured correctly to be able to pay taxes, essentially. Your background, would you like to give a little background?
Roger Brown, ACS Laboratory, largest cannabis and hemp testing laboratory on the eastern half of the United States.
Hey, what's
And
up?
here he is.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
We actually don't have any 280E issues because we're not touching the plant business either.
Yeah. And we don't have 280E issues, however, all the clients that we service do. And to give you an idea, so Wurk is an HR payroll platform. We're in 33 states. We pay 1 in 10 employees in the cannabis industry nationwide. So every single one of our clients is subject to the 280E tax provision. Is there anybody in here who's unaware of exactly what 280E is? Okay, cool. All right, so we can dive into that. Back in the 80s, there was a cocaine trafficker who got caught for tax evasion, and the IRS got pissed off because he was writing off his house, his boat, and his cars as a tax deduction. So they put in 280E back in the 80s to stop folks who were dealing in illegal substances from being able to write these things off. And those are all business expenses associated with cost of goods. So now, fast forward to today, cannabis is state legal, however, it's federally illegal, and the IRS is a federal body. So they are taking this 280E provision and they're applying it to the cannabis space. So what that means, if you are trafficking the substance or if you're retailing or selling the substance, you are subject to 280E. If you're producing the substance, you're not. So this is really challenging for businesses that are both growers as well as retailers, as they have to just have the distinction between all costs that are associated towards a 280E or not. So if a bud tender is selling the product, their labor expenses are not deductible towards cost of goods. If you are a grower and a trimmer, your expenses are deductible under of 280E, so towards cost of goods. This creates an effective tax rate for most cannabis companies above 75%. So they are overtaxed, which causes a lot of strain in the business, reduces their margin, and makes it very hard to operate. So that's a general overview of that.
File your taxes, pay your taxes, ask for a refund, go to tax court.
So now we've been in business for 4 years, and we've had a lot of clients come to us asking for help on how to manage 280E. And so as a workforce management provider, we're tracking employees clocking in and out of work. So some of the things that we do is build out cost centers so that employees can clock into a job task that is 280E job task or it's not. And those, now we're starting to see those get split out by type of business. So even in the retail environment, there's certain tasks that employees are doing that are deductible, there's certain tasks that they're not, and that also translates over into the grow as well. And what we're seeing is the IRS is actually digging into these businesses, asking for video surveillance footage of employees, what they're doing throughout the day, to try to justify taking away this tax shelter for these cannabis clients. So the IRS's goal is to make sure your taxes are as expensive as possible, which causes a lot of headache for cannabis companies.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Keegan. Sorry, my name is Zach Kobrin, and I apologize. I literally got stuck coming upstairs. So I know they gave an introduction for this panel, but I think there's a broad spectrum of things that can be covered, not just tax, primarily when it comes to corporate governance, compliance, and operational aspects. You know, Roger, with your company, and this is a unique aspect because these are two operators who work in ancillary service business who don't necessarily deal with plain touching businesses. So their focus and their aspect and their perspective is a lot different, but actually extremely useful, since the majority of people in the cannabis industry actually are the ancillary goods or service providers.
But we do both deal with compliance, which
correct.
is actually a good thing.
And that's the point I want to make is that the compliance aspect that you guys approach to your businesses is probably as important, if not more important, and timely, because of the fact that the majority of the companies are not necessarily plain touching growers and sellers. So for your business, from your perspective, what's your approach? What do you think are some of the requirements for, especially like in Florida, best practices, important, the things that are important from a compliance aspect that you kind of have injected into your business, and that, I know now you're talking to other companies on how to, implement best practices. So what are some of the compliance aspects that you focus on?
Well, our compliance aspects are all about how we do our business. We are a compliance testing laboratory. We test cannabis, we test hemp from CBD from hemp from 24 different states. In the state of Florida, we test the majority of the cannabis in the state of Florida. And it's all about compliance here in Florida, and in every other state as well for hemp, because it's all about delivering a product to a consumer that is safe from contaminants. We test for potency, which of course is everybody tests for potency, and everybody wants to know what their potency is, but what's behind that is contaminants. Contaminants are mold, mildew, mycotoxins, heavy metals, pesticides, all of those things that can actually cause severe illness, can cause physical damage to the human body. So the compliance aspect of somebody who's actually selling a product to an end user, they need to make sure that it's safe. So they send it to a laboratory such as ours, which is based in Tampa, and and again, probably 70% of all the marijuana that is sold in the state of Florida, we test. And this hemp from 24 different states. And there are hemp producers that are out there in the United States that are producing product at a very, very high quality. Very high quality. They have GMP standards. They are trying to meet the projected FDA standards. Today they dropped USDA standards out there, and how those are going to wash out and what's going to happen with them will be very interesting. But
what do you see some as, like, from your perspective, having now dealing with so many of these operators at that direct plant touching level, either on the marijuana or on the hemp side, what do you see are maybe some of the hurdles that these operators, and I guess to an extension the ancillary providers, that they're dealing with in implementing good practices and compliance measures?
they all want to produce good product. Some want to follow the rules, some want to follow greater level of rules. I mean, every grower is a little bit different, and they all want to produce good product, and they all want to make sure that they are compliant with what's projected to be the rules in the state of Florida. The state of Florida doesn't have any rules right now.
Not yet.
As odd as that might seem. I mean, we're doing $800 million worth of business this year in cannabis and have no rules, because the Department of Health has just been quite lax in promulgating the rules. But we're hoping that those will be promulgated pretty soon.
I think one thing that's interesting is you look at the businesses in the cannabis industry, especially here in Florida, a lot of them are growing from 10 employees to thousands of employees overnight.
Right.
And they're going from one store to 20, 30, 40 stores overnight. And with that type of growth, ensuring that every piece of your supply chain is buttoned up and every product on your shelves is of high quality, it's not going to make anybody sick, you're protecting your patients, all of your employees are getting properly trained and educated on what you're doing. It's that much growth makes that really challenging.
And that's an interesting point for someone like you and what you guys do at Wurk, because it's not just complying with your specific cannabis-related regulations, right? What I've told a lot of people is, cannabis is just another widget. It's just the most highly regulated product you've ever dealt with. So you not only have to deal with the compliance issues and the day-to-day issues associated with, well, how do I maintain and operate my business within the confines of this regulation? But for someone like what Wurk does, why don't you talk about a little bit, like, some of the compliance issues that may be associated with non-cannabis related regulations, whether it's FMLA, ACA, payroll issues that you're seeing in the industry that companies, whether you're an ancillary provider or you're an actual operator, that you need to be aware of. What are some things you're seeing there?
Yeah, so a lot of the agencies that we focus on is the IRS, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Labor, and that's federally as well as within the state. And as these companies are growing, there's more back office regulation that comes into place, compliance that you have to do to be able to have employees. Family Medical Leave Act, you have to make sure that you have a leave program in place so that if someone's going overseas with the military, that you provide support for them to do that. Affordable Care Act, if you have over 50 full-time equivalent employees, you have to have an affordable benefit plan for your employees. If anybody's working over 30 hours as an hourly employee, you have to offer them a benefit plan. So there's all of this back office employee-related compliance that goes on, and what we see in the cannabis space is because the cannabis regulations are so challenging and they change so frequently, that gets the focus of the business. And as time goes on, the thing that gets neglected is a lot of these back office traditional aspects of compliance. And that's when the Department of Homeland Security steps in to say, hey, you have people that aren't legal to work in your business, and we're going to shut you down.
And this may be a loaded question, so forgive me. I mean, Roger, how important is it then, kind of based on that people maybe lose sight of the fact that you still have to comply with standard employment practices, business operations? How important is it to have a really good HR department or a really good accounting?
Well, I tell everybody this all the time. In the cannabis business or in the hemp business, it's so easy to go from $0 to $3 million a year in revenue. You don't need all those compliance components, and then you finally realize, oh my God, I need them. And then to go from 3 million to 6 million, you need an HR person, you need attorneys, you need payroll companies, you need to make sure your taxes are paid. There's a lot of components that rely, there's a lot of parts of the company that relies on the compliance issues. And to be able to grow the business, it's still a business. It's not, Cheech and Chong deciding to open up a business. It's a business. You have to operate it like a company, like a business, and be compliant with all the rules. I mean, the future of this industry is so many different components that are out there that you have to put them together and still run a business.
So, Keegan, let me ask you then, what are you seeing, I guess, along those same lines? What are some of the issues that maybe are employment or HR related issues that you're seeing companies have issues dealing with, whether it's pre-employment drug screenings or other, are there certain issues that, like you're saying, they don't, or both of you were saying, they don't realize they need these things until it's too late? What are some of the key issues that you think employees or employers need to focus on that they're not?
We're seeing a trend that's hit the industry of trying to make employees 1099 contractors versus actually W-2ing the employee. If you create a schedule for that employee, they're no longer a contractor. And businesses are deploying this as a strategy so that they don't have to pay employer taxes, and that contractor has to pay their own taxes. So it's a way to get rid of paying taxes. But the Department of Labor is stepping in, and the cannabis industry is ripe pickings for them because there's a lot of companies that aren't complying, and that's a huge tax channel for them. But the drug screening is a whole nother, that could be a hour-long conversation, because we're in the cannabis industry, we're all obviously open to cannabis, but if you have people using heavy machinery, you gotta make sure that they're sober. So like you said, you still have to run a business that's safe and compliant, regardless of the product that you're putting out in the market.
Once you get over a certain level of employees, you should never pay your own taxes. You should always have a third party pay your taxes, because it's so much easier, because not paying your taxes is a crime. So it's foolish to not do that. You should always have a third party company. We do background checks on every single one of our employees. Now we're required to do level 2 background checks on every single one of our employees. So there's a whole new level of compliance that's even coming down the road, where now we have to have a drug policy, drug employment policy in our company. We have to do level 2 background checks, even though we do regular background checks. And then we don't even get to see the level 2 background check results. It goes straight to the state.
You can get them.
You can? Good.
Yeah,
Tell me
we'll
how.
talk after. You can get them. There's a way to do it.
it.
No, there's.
Yeah.
It's a simple request, but yeah. We've talked a lot about employment in the short time we have, but one of the things, and Roger, you touched on this a little bit, cannabis is here, and marijuana is here, and hemp is here, and you could put 10 scientists, 10 agronomists, and 10 lawyers all in the same room, and they'd all give you different answers to the question of, okay, well, which is which? From my perspective, it's all cannabis, and hemp is hemp, and marijuana is marijuana. The law defines them in different ways. So looking at the legal landscape that we're facing right now, as Roger just said, USDA just issued their draft rules for federal rules for hemp. State by state, each have their own separate rules, either for hemp or for marijuana use, production. So it's all cannabis, but they're very different requirements. So, I'd like to talk a little bit, the issues that maybe you're seeing from the lab testing side, being able to differentiate between hemp and marijuana. One of the issues that I think you saw a lot of states pass hemp bills is being able to know, well, what's hemp, what's marijuana, whether or not we're going to actually, how's it now affecting criminal prosecutions, things like that. So this push towards more regulation and more, advancement of the industries, both on the hemp side and the marijuana side, how are you seeing it kind of affected directly in the lab space?
Well, it's very easy to tell the difference between hemp and marijuana. First of all, they have 2 different chemical makeups. But the most defining point is if its THC is greater than 0.3 by federal standards. By Florida standards, it's greater than 0.3 THC. including, or total THC, including THCAA. So it's just a simple calculation as to determine whether it's hemp or cannabis or hemp or marijuana. But you can also tell by the chemical compounds of the actual plant, whether it is hemp or marijuana as well. So it's not that complicated to do. But there's a huge push out there for product that's going to be compliant with what the rules are going to be. And we keep chasing the rules. We keep chasing the rules and they keep changing them. So until they promulgate them, we really don't know. But it's very easy to tell the difference between the two, I can tell you that.
So, you know, I think on the cannabis industry as a whole, we've seen these kind of phases of development, whether you're on the hemp side or you're on the marijuana side. And, you know, you see it with the way companies are forming, companies are the big, you know, consolidation pushes. And every one of us has our own crystal ball, but, you know, I want to leave us some time for questions, but I also kind of want to dig into being in the position that the two of you are in, of, you know, running companies that the industry relies on. The industry needs your services. The industry needs your services. And the fact that the industry as a whole is changing so rapidly, state by state, nationally, internationally. So, you know, a couple of minutes each. Why don't, you know, tell us what you think, where do you see the next level is? What's the next step for the industry? Where do you see the regulations hammering out? Do we see more, less, more consolidation, less? What's your crystal ball say for the way the regulatory structures are going to shape out in, say, the next 2 to 3 years?
This whole industry is all going to be about transparency and brand loyalty. It's 100% what it's going to be. If you're transparent with your product and you let people know what is in your product and the quality of your product, they will then create brand loyalty. I tell this story all the time. Whoever walks into a Publix supermarket or any supermarket and goes down the aisle and picks up a can of Campbell's soup and looks at the can of Campbell's soup and reads it and says, you know what, I really don't believe that there's this much sodium or this much carbohydrates in this can of Campbell's soup, because they trust the brand of Campbell's soup. Well, marijuana and hemp, that business is going to go that way. People are going to trust the brands, that they're quality brands, that they're quality products. And they're going to trust them because they're transparent with what's in the product. And it's just a very, very educated consumer in the marijuana business. And it's such a great, it was said here earlier today that, you know, this is an economy, not a business. It really is an economy. And it's about trusting the brand and the transparency. That's where the future is going to be.
And what about you, Keegan? What do you think is the next step for the industry? Where do you think things are turning, you know, from maybe the regulatory front? Where do you see the issues?
One, I agree with you 100%. Brand consistency in the future is going to be majorly important, and the compliance of facilities and the product that people put on shelves. If someone gets sick from your product and that becomes national news, you no longer have a business. That's how delicate this industry is right now. And not only do you sacrifice your own brand, you sacrifice the entire industry, as we've seen from 6 vape cartridges that were sold at the black market to people dying. This entire industry is now suffering from that, and it's nothing to do with regulated cannabis. So I think consistency and transparency in brands is going to be extremely important. It's going to be the only way to survive. I also think that this industry is a target. Nick Richards is a former IRS attorney, now on the green side doing tax law, and he's now put out an article about the amount of audits that are about to come from the IRS to go after 280E, for instance. So I think that these government agencies have, and because cannabis is a new emerging market, the IRS has the ability to audit businesses more often than the traditional industry. So this industry is going to be a target, and the more information the government has on this industry, the more they're going to go after it. So I think now is the time to run a compliant business and really understand what it takes to run a business and have people that work for you, and make sure that you're buttoned up.
I know we've touched a little bit on the tax side and kind of giving the broad overview of 280E, and definitely not this panel, but for companies that are not operators, that are in the ancillary goods and services space, what's the tax landscape for companies like yours? Are you seeing the same kinds of difficulties that maybe operators are seeing? What about you, Roger?
We do not have a 280E issue at all.
We're not subject to 280E, however, because we bank payroll and taxes for the industry, so we're moving about $500 million of payroll and tax money through our accounts every year. That number doubles every year. We have to use cannabis banks, and that's how we are able to support the industry. So we're subject to the same cost of banking as the rest of the industry, and we're seeing that consistent with other ancillary companies as well, who have a bank account with Chase. Chase finds out that their business supports cannabis and then decides to shut it down.
And that's a very interesting point we touched on that a lot of people don't realize, is that if you are, for the most part, dealing with, we'll say tier 1 money would be money that comes directly from the sale or plant touching money. Tier 2 money may be like investment money, next level money within the industry. There is not a readily available banking industry, so you have to find the banks, whether it's credit unions, state chartered banks, that are willing to do it. And there is an increased cost to it, and it's not like the banks are looking to make money off of it. They're not really making money off of the fees. You're paying for the increased compliance aspect, right? A state chartered bank, to offer cannabis operations, has to then hire at least 2 more compliance officers. And they're going to do the due diligence, and they're going to have regular ongoing compliance. So if you're in this space, whether you're an operator or an ancillary goods or service provider, don't be surprised if your bank wants to do on-site inspections, or wants your quarterly P&Ls, or wants to do, wants monthly calls, or has
List of owners.
List of owners is the slightest thing. I used to tell people all the time, the 2 people you are not going to lie to ever in this industry are your lawyer and your banker. They're the 2 people you are going to rely on more than you can imagine. But that gets back to the transparency aspect. So it's being able to also understand that the way businesses operate in this space is just a little different. You have to give up a little more to get a little more. So I think understanding that, do you have issues with banking, or are you able to, in your space, can you talk about that?
I was 35 years with Wells Fargo, and they shut me down. So yeah, we've had a few issues.
Right, and from the banking side, listen, I literally have had battles with people to explain to them that when the bank shows up and wants to do a monthly on-site inspection, you let them in, right? Because the last thing you want is them saying, we're shutting you down. And, especially...
Yeah, but I was shut down by Wells Fargo the same week that the CEO of Wells Fargo resigned, and all their senior members were indicted for fraud. So, and they just shut me down. Yeah, so really crazy.
Yeah, no, it is crazy, and the irony of it is that, some of these larger banks get away with, murder, and the reality is most cannabis companies, whether you're an operator in the space, plant touching or not, most of these companies actually run clean companies. They want to be as compliant as possible to avoid the extra scrutiny. I think most people realize it, and those that don't realize it end up not succeeding in this industry. We've probably all seen it. We can see it a mile away. People we know, where we can just look at them and go, your company's not going to be around in a year from now. And a lot of that comes back to understanding the compliance aspect, understanding the regulatory framework you're operating in, and knowing how to navigate it. I know we only have a few more minutes left, I think. So I want to, I want to maybe open up to some questions if we can.
Can you speak to standard deviation of what you think about this? What you think is actually acceptable? Because if you look at the new USDA rules, essentially they allow for, I don't know the exact amount of standard deviation, but essentially you could be above the amount of THC threshold, but if your standard deviation allows for you to come down, say you're 0.5%, within 0.5%, and your standard deviation is 0.6, say, then you may be compliant, or you may be overly incompliant. What's the what are the labs saying about that?
You're referring to potency testing, and in reference to potency testing, our standard deviation is plus or minus 5%. But what we've been able to do is we work with growers and hemp producers that have their own internal laboratory. Almost everybody will have their own internal laboratory. You buy an HPLC, and you can do your own potency testing in-house, but you still need independent third-party testing. So we work with them by sharing our technology with them, and then we can, because we share our technology with them, we can narrow the scope to plus or minus 2%. But it's still going to be a standard deviation of a variance there. So if you get a product that's going to test at 0.299% THC, yeah, that's going to be within the standard deviation. So as like the example you just gave, if it was 0.42, then that's going to be within the standard deviation. And if it was tested again, it could test below.
Yeah, I'm just curious, you ever had any scenarios where that kind of came back, or is that still too early in the stage?
Most of the hemp that we test is either really, really low in its THC content, or it's really high. We don't really get a lot that's in between at all. But I mean, it could have a lot of THCAA, and it all depends on what the calculation is. Some states are just Delta 9 THC, and some states are total THC Delta 9 plus THCAA.
Yeah, not to steal before here, but USDA is, at least according to the recent one, it seems like they're going to be adding in THCAA, so it'll be pretty interesting to see the way that shakes out.
Yeah, you can have a lot of THCAA in your product, and very little THC, and you're still going to get high.
For those that don't know what's going on, what he's referring to is the USDA put out their 160-page draft rules for hemp regulations today. And literally you read it in less than an hour. Good for you. I'm proud of you. Because I couldn't read it that fast.
I didn't, my legal team did.
Yeah. And so on the standard deviation, what you're typically seeing, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm nowhere near an expert in this area, but in the pharmaceutical space, you would usually see, okay, your potency levels within medications have to be within a standard deviation of a certain level. And one of the issues on the hemp industry side that has been a big issue is with regards to testing potency levels, there is no uniform standard deviation. My guess is going to be like any new regulation, the industry is going to vacillate a little bit, bitch a little bit, fall back a little bit.
There's no uniform standard deviation, but there's also no uniform protocol. There's no uniform standard sample prep. There's no uniform standard procedures to be able to do. So, different laboratories are going to test different results, and it causes different variations in result. It's all about consistency. No different than anything else in business. It's always about consistency. If you test consistently, if you do something consistently, you're going to come out with the same probable result.
Any other questions? Yes.
How does the sharing of your technology on the independent lab testing side kind of compromise, if at all, the nature of the independence of the testing that you provide?
It doesn't compromise it at all. Most growers or hemp growers have an HPLC inside their internal laboratory so they can do R&D testing. What we do is we share our technology and our protocols, our SOPs, our procedures, so that they test the same way that we test. So you know that when you're testing a product inside your business, when you send it to us, you're going to basically get the same result. So you know before you send it. So you're going to have the proper answer ahead of time. And then you're just going to get a confirmation of it by third party. It doesn't compromise anything. It just makes you as a grower or a hemp producer better.
That question just kind of sparked a thought, and maybe Keegan, you can touch on a little bit with regard to the sharing of information. But in this space, especially whether it's medical or adult use, information is key. Data is money. And there's a ton of either state by state, especially like if you're in California or on the federal level, there's a ton of regulation that deals with information sharing, buying, brokering, things like that. Maybe talk real quick for everyone the importance of data security and, on your internal levels, making sure that your operational is not, leaking and that you are securing as much information as you can.
Yeah, and we just released an analytics tool on our platform, as well as we're benchmarking data. So we're taking all the data out of our systems from our clients, aggregating it, anonymizing it, and then providing industry benchmarks on compensation, benefits analysis, all these types of things. So we've had to go through this very recently, and we're now starting to follow the GDPR rules coming over from Europe, which is very stringent on housing data, protecting it, but also being able to get rid of it if someone so chooses that they don't want their information in your data set anymore. But we've seen now seed to sale companies who are collecting patient data have their source code post online, and challenges of data leaking. And as we become more and more regulated, this is going to be HIPAA compliant data. So there's going to be a bigger and bigger emphasis on protecting the data that's being collected in the business. So I think this is going to be something else in the next 12 months to 24 months that becomes a real issue, not only for the cannabis industry, but every business in America or in the world is really focusing on data security. But because we're touching patient data, I think it's going to be that much more scrutinized and important to cover.
Sure. Thank you. Any other questions?
If a company tests its product in-house based on the same standard that you mentioned, why refer it to a third party? Is that required to have a third party confirmation, or?
It's required. It's required to have an independent third-party testing laboratory verify your product.
Okay.
The only reason why you do it in-house is for R&D purposes.
Are there any set labs that are established by the state saying that these are the labs that are allowed to do third-party testing?
Yes, there is. And although the rules are not promulgated in the state of Florida, they're going to require that a lab has an ISO 17025 certification. I would tell you that an ISO 17025 certification is great to have, but you have to live up to the certification. There are some laboratories that get the certification and then do not follow the procedures and the protocols post getting the certification until they need another renewal. We follow it all the time. We're a clinical laboratory. Clinical laboratory tests at a much higher level, at a medical quality level.
I think what's interesting is, like, we're in the business of keeping the cannabis industry alive, keeping these businesses open. And I love that you guys are crossing that threshold and helping these companies, because you want safe products on the shelves. You want these companies to be able to operate, and you're trying to give them as much tools as they can to make sure that the product that's going to come to you is going to get passed and get on the shelves. And but we also, at the same time, have to manage the integrity of the industry and make sure that we are complying with regulations. So.
There was another question I thought I saw. Yes.
Thank you. As for taxes, is the expense for sampling, testing your product a business expense, a deductible business tax expense?
Depends on what kind of business you're in. I mean, are we talking hemp? Are we talking marijuana?
Either or. We're in the tax business, trying to see how we can become a solution for the industry.
I think that may be a longer conversation for an accountant and a tax lawyer.
Yeah, there's
Not to avoid the answer, but that's just, there's more information I think that maybe needed to answer that question.
we are the execution tool. Businesses form their strategy with their tax attorney, and then we execute on that strategy moving forward. So every time we get asked on whether or not it's this or that, we always send someone to a tax attorney to figure it out. But we need more folks in the industry that are focused on tax, because these businesses need help.
Yes, sir.
What's the difference between a level 1 and level 2 backup check, background check?
In Florida, they call it a level 2 background check. It's essentially an FBI criminal background check. It's a statutory function. Other states refer to the same level background check in a different name or manner, but it's essentially the state's version of an FBI criminal background check.
Short answer is it goes deeper.
I think to your point earlier, you don't get the results. So as a business, it's still important to do your own background screening so you know the people you're hiring.
We do background screening on every employee for the last 11 years. So we don't hire anybody until their background screening comes back.
Any other questions? Well, I want to thank Roger and Keegan. I want to thank you guys for sticking around. It's an important topic, not always the, a little dry sometimes, but also it's an issue and topic that I think every business needs to know about. So we appreciate you guys hanging out, and I think we'll all be available for questions if anyone wants to speak.